On February 24th, 1996, 4 men, 2 planes. Their mission? Search for Cuban migrants. Cuban MiG-29 fighter jets locked onto their planes and fired heat-seeking missiles, executing them in international waters. The man who gave that order, Raúl Castro. Cuban MiG-29 fighter jets locked onto their planes and fired heat-seeking missiles in international airspace. Within minutes, Armando Alejandre, Carlos Costa, Mario de la Peña, and Pablo Morales were gone. Not captured, not warned, executed.
There was the fire coming out of the sky, rolling and down, and it just hit the water and it started blazing there.
For 30 years, the man who gave that order lived freely. He became president. He shook hands with world leaders. He watched his brother's revolution outlast 10 American administrations. He turned 94. And then, on May 20th, 2026, Cuban Independence Day, the United States federal government finally said his name in a courtroom, and the world changed. Every administration since Clinton knew what happened. Every prosecutor had the evidence. Every Cuban-American family had been waiting. But here is the detail most people miss. This indictment was never just about 1996. It was always about right now. To understand why this indictment matters, not symbolically, but strategically, you need to understand what Cuba looks like right now in May 2026. The island is collapsing, not slowly, rapidly. Havana residents are living with 20 to 22 hours of blackouts every single day. Municipal water systems have failed because the pumps need electricity to run. Fuel reserves have been exhausted. The Cuban government has publicly admitted it. Factories are idle. Public transportation has stopped. In some provinces, blackouts last 48 consecutive hours. This is not a natural disaster. This is the result of a deliberate, calculated pressure campaign by the Trump administration, the same campaign that just months earlier removed Nicolás Maduro from power in Venezuela through a military raid that shocked the world. Cuba is next. The question is not whether Washington wants regime change. The question is how far they are willing to go to get it. This is not just about one old man facing murder charges. This is about whether the last communist government in the Western Hemisphere survives the next 12 months. And the answer to that question affects every country on this planet. The 1996 shootdown was not a mistake. It was not a miscalculation. It was a planned military operation with a name, a chain of command, and a kill order signed in January. The name of the operation was a Scorpion. It began not with missiles, but with spies. Cuban intelligence agents had embedded themselves inside Brothers to the Rescue, the very organization whose pilots they were planning to kill. Those agents reported flight schedules, tail numbers, and departure dates directly back to Havana. In January 1996, Raúl Castro, then Cuba's Minister of Defense, gave official approval for the use of deadly force. The pilots who carried out the attack were told which specific days in February they should not get into an aircraft. They knew what was coming. The 4 men who died did not. This is how Operation Scorpion worked. And this is why, 30 years later, a federal grand jury in Miami finally returned an indictment. The evidence was always there. What changed was the political will. 6 administrations, 30 years. Prosecutors in Miami had drafted an indictment against Castro in the 1990s. The evidence existed. The legal framework existed. What did not exist, until now, was a president willing to use it. Brothers to the Rescue was founded in 1991 by Cuban-American pilot José Basulto. Their mission was simple and dangerous: fly small Cessna aircraft over the Florida Straits and locate Cuban migrants, called balseros, who had left the island on makeshift rafts, often dying of thirst and exposure before reaching Florida. Between 1991 and 1996, the organization rescued more than 4,200 people from the sea. They were volunteers. They were unarmed. They flew in civilian aircraft with no military designation, but they also dropped anti-regime leaflets over Havana. They flew into Cuban airspace on at least 25 documented occasions. The Cuban government filed formal complaints with Washington more than a dozen times. The FAA issued warnings to Brothers to the Rescue about what it called taunting of the Cuban government. None of that justifies what happened next. but it explains why Havana decided that February 24th, 1996, would be the last time those planes flew. Every analyst focuses on whether the planes were in Cuban or international airspace, but that is the wrong question entirely. The United Nations, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and the International Civil Aviation Organization all reached the same conclusion: international airspace. Cuba fired anyway. The Clinton administration condemned the attack immediately. Congress passed the Helms-Burton Act within weeks, tightening the embargo and making it nearly impossible for future presidents to lift sanctions without congressional approval. A Cuban intelligence agent embedded inside Brothers to the Rescue was later convicted in a U.S. federal court, but Raúl Castro, the man who signed the kill order, faced nothing. He became president of Cuba in 2006 when Fidel fell ill. He shook hands with Barack Obama in 2016 at a historic summit in Havana. He stepped down as president in 2018. He stepped down as Communist Party secretary in 2021. And through all of it, the families of Armando Alejandre, Carlos Costa, Mario de la Peña, and Pablo Morales waited. Miriam de la Peña, the mother of Mario, said it plainly: the delay in justice has been the biggest injustice. She has been saying that for 30 years. She was finally heard on May 20th, 2026. But here is what changes everything. The indictment was secretly returned by a federal grand jury on April 23rd, 2026. It was unsealed on May 20th, Cuban Independence Day, while the USS Nimitz was already moving into the Caribbean. That timing was not accidental. The last time a U.S. adversary was indicted in a federal court and then physically removed from power, it was Nicolás Maduro of Venezuela. The sequence was identical: criminal charges, economic pressure, military assets positioned nearby, diplomatic back channels opened, and then a special operations raid that extracted the sitting head of government from his own capital. That operation took place in January 2026. 4 months later, Raúl Castro was indicted. But here is why Cuba is different. Venezuela had oil that the U.S. needed to manage. Cuba has something else entirely: 90 miles of proximity to Florida, Russian and Chinese intelligence infrastructure on its soil, and a military conglomerate called GAESA that controls 40% of the entire Cuban economy, including every major hotel, every gas station, every port, and the island's only international bank. Removing Maduro was a raid. What Washington is planning for Cuba is a restructuring, because here is the detail most analysts miss entirely. CIA Director John Ratcliffe didn't just visit Havana. He brought someone with him, someone the Cubans recognized, someone who had been in Caracas 4 months earlier, and he made sure they knew exactly who that person was. Multiple sources confirmed that the person Ratcliffe brought to Havana was a paramilitary operator, one of the men directly involved in the capture of Nicolás Maduro. Ratcliffe introduced him to the Cuban officials at the table. He made a point of it. The message was not subtle. The message was, we know how to do this. We have done this. The man who did it is sitting across from you right now. Cuba's response was to mobilize. Thousands of men were called up for military reserve duty. Children in schools were taken to shelters and told American bombs might fall. The regime announced it had acquired 300 military drones from Russia and Iran. The point of no return had been reached. Both sides knew it. The question now was which side would blink first, and what the cost of not blinking would be. But here is the question no one is asking. If the Trump administration wanted to simply remove Raúl Castro the way they removed Maduro, why haven't they? He is 94 years old. He is not the president. He has not been the Communist Party secretary since 2021. So why him? Why now? To answer that, you need to understand what GAESA actually is. GAESA, the Grupo de Administración Empresarial, is a military conglomerate that controls approximately 40% of Cuba's entire economy. It owns 120 hotels. It controls every major gas station on the island. It runs the ports, the telecommunications infrastructure, the construction sector, and Cuba's only international bank, the Banco Financiero Internacional, which processes every foreign transaction the Cuban government makes. GAESA was built by Raúl Castro, Its first director was his son-in-law. Its current key figure is his grandson, Raúl Guillermo Rodriguez Castro, known as Raulito, who was present at the CIA meeting in Havana. Here is what that means. The man the U.S. indicted for murder is the same man whose family controls the economic infrastructure that any post-Castro Cuba would need to function. You cannot restructure Cuba without going through GAESA, and you cannot go through GAESA without going through the Castro family. A 94-year-old man just became the most dangerous legal document in the Western Hemisphere, not because of what he did, not because of what he is, because of what indicting him makes legally possible. The warrant exists. The precedent exists. The carrier is already there. The indictment of Raúl Castro does something that no amount of sanctions or oil blockades could do alone. It creates a legal basis for military extraction, the same legal basis that justified the January 2026 operation in Venezuela. But here is the larger question it opens. What happens to Cuba if the Castro family is removed? Unlike Venezuela, where Delcy Rodriguez stepped in as a functional replacement and the government machinery kept running, Cuba has no obvious successor. The Communist Party, the military, and GAESA are so deeply intertwined with the Castro name that removing the family doesn't just change the leadership, it potentially collapses the entire governing structure. And a collapsed Cuba, 90 miles from Florida, means something specific. Hundreds of thousands of refugees, boats, rafts, the same Florida Straits where Brothers to the Rescue once flew. Except this time, there would be no volunteers. There would be a crisis. But here is what changes everything about this entire analysis. The Trump administration is not trying to collapse Cuba. They are trying to buy it. And the price they have in mind is not measured in dollars. It is measured in nickel, cobalt, and beachfront property. Cuba sits above some of the largest nickel and cobalt deposits in the Western Hemisphere. Nickel was Cuba's third largest export in 2024. Cobalt is a critical mineral used in electric vehicle batteries and military hardware. China is currently the dominant buyer. On May 1, 2026, the Trump administration issued an executive order imposing secondary sanctions on any company doing business with GAESA, sanctions comparable to those applied to Iran, Russia, and North Korea. Within days, Sherritt International, the Canadian mining company that had operated Cuba's nickel mines since 1994, announced it was dissolving its joint venture. But here is the detail most people missed. Sherritt didn't just leave. It entered negotiations to sell a 55% controlling stake to Gillen Capital, a Dallas-based firm connected to a former Trump administration official. Taken together, the indictment, the carrier, the CIA visit, and the mining deal are not separate events. They are one coordinated operation. And if that is true, if this is a coordinated operation and not a series of coincidences, then the endgame is not regime change. The endgame is something the United States has not attempted in the Western Hemisphere since 1989. And the last time they tried it, it took 27,000 troops. We started this video with 4 men in 2 planes over the Florida Straits. We end it with 11 million people on an island 90 miles from the United States, living in darkness, waiting for something to change. The indictment of Raúl Castro did not change their lives, not yet, but it changed what is legally possible. And in geopolitics, what is legally possible has a way of becoming what is militarily inevitable. The detail most people miss is this. The last time Washington used an indictment as a pretext for regime change, it worked. The question is not whether they will try it again. The question is whether Cuba survives the attempt and what it looks like on the other side. If this analysis gave you something you didn't have before, hit like, subscribe to this channel and turn on the bell. Now check the next video.